Good morning, brother and sister. This session, I will join with Jeremy, our English student pastor from Houston, Fort Bend Community Church, to bring this message to you. So this is a combined meeting. That means English speaking, Chinese speaking will be together. So you need to excuse my broken English, and then we will learn together. Now, I will first give an introduction, then I'll bring Jeremy along he will be next, and then I'll come back, talk about our topic today is about challenges to sticky faith. When we talk about uniting the generation, reaching the next generation for Christ, what are some of the challenges? So this will be a very practical sessions, and this will be, we will follow up by a Q&A sessions after a short break. Now, I don't know whether you watch YouTube video. Now, I watch YouTube when I learn how to cook. If I want to make a dish, and I would always go on YouTube and find a video teaching me how to make the dish. Now, this is one website. Can you put up the PowerPoint? This is one of the website or video, YouTube video that I have found very good video I'm going to introduce to you. It's called Made with Lao. Made with Lao. The other day I was learning how to make ginger skeleton sauce. So you can see. And next slide. This doesn't work. Next slide. And next slide, please. Okay. Now this is the chief chef, Daddy Lau. He has been a chef for 50 years. Very good, make Cantonese dishes. I came from Hong Kong, so I love Cantonese dishes. So when I learned how to make Cantonese dish, this website came to me. This is Daddy Lau. And next slide. This is his son, Randy. Randy came to the U.S. very young age, or even at ABC. I don't know the detail. But this is his son, Randy. Randy speaks English, but he and his father joined together and teach people how to cook. Next slide, please. This is his family. You can see it's mixed or cross-generation family. Daddy Lau and Mrs. Lau, son Randy. And you notice the daughter-in-law was a Caucasian. And then they have a young child, the grandson, and then the sister, I believe, I don't know who that lady is. So this is the family. Daddy Lau came to the U.S. after retirement, came from Hong Kong, and then after 50 years of being a chef, he retired in the United States. Okay, next slide. So together, they have this idea to pass on the heritage of cooking to the next generation, from Daddy Lau to the next generation. Now, learn how to make the ginger sauce. Do you love ginger sauce? It is very good, especially with chicken, right? So this is very simple, but a lot of tricks, a lot of details. So Daddy Lau, next slide, decided to teach. Now, Daddy speaks only Cantonese, no English. So the son make this website, you can see is bilingual. When Daddy Lau speaks, he speaks in Cantonese. When the son, Randy speaks, he speaks in English. And together they have this bilingual website. Just like worship singing this morning. We have the Chinese and English parallel side by side. Now, do you think this is easy to make a project together? Now, this become a very well visited web video. They make money from this thing. This is a business making money, making profit. At the same time, this family has learned how to pass on the heritage from the older generation to the next generation. It became a beautiful picture. I was fascinated by this story. Now, what are some of the challenges in order to make this work? What are some of the challenges in order to make this work? First, language. We just mentioned Daddy Lau only speak Cantonese, and then the son Randy only speak English. So how do they communicate? How do they make a website? How do they teach people to cook? And then there's cultural differences. When Daddy Lau make dishes, everything is about experience. So how do this make this ginger sauce? A little of this, cook for a moment, and then it will come. For him, it is like this. Just little soy sauce, little salt, and then you make this, put this in here, put in there. Not exactly precise. This is the Cantonese way you learn by, not by measurement, it's by experience, by watching. But Randy said it doesn't work. In America, everything is very precise. So he asked Daddy Lau, now, what does it mean? A little salt, a little this, what does it mean? How many grams you're talking about? So he will add to this video, after Daddy Lau teaches in the video, that in the middle, he will add some comment. Now, what Daddy means is that 35 milligram or gram of salt you need to put in. Now, how many tablespoons of oil you need to put in? Add this into the video. And also, you can see, he introduced this temperature gun. Now, when Daddy said, okay, now boil the oil when it is hot, then you put the ginger in. And then Randy will say, what is the temperature of the oil that you are talking about? So he introduces, and he finds this temperature gun. This, infrared light. So he shoot this gun at the oil and said, now, boil the oil to 350 degrees. Then you put the oil, he put the ginger in. Now together, they make this wonderful videos. At the end, next slide. At the end. Now, at the end of the video, every recipe is like that. The whole family sit together around the table with a dish in the middle. This is the ginger sauce. Do you see the ginger sauce there? And then, cross-generation, they talk about the dish. Beautiful story. The son will ask, I love this sauce. And then Daddy will ask him, why you love it? And then he will ask ask the daddy, okay, when you say this, what do you mean? Can you tell me a little bit more? And then the three generations sit together. Now, the baby is still very young. But at the end of the day, a very important lesson has been taught from generation to generation. It's how to make ginger sauce. Now today we're talking about sticky faith. Passing on our heritage, our faith, from one generation to the other generation. Now this is not just about cooking. This is about life and death, eternity, about our spiritual life. We pass on to one generation to one generation. Now there are the result of this beautiful family project is that they enjoy each other's company. And they're able to pass on value from the older generation to the next generation. And then together, they enjoy, they have a beautiful picture of what a family is all about. Now, when sticky faith is the same, when we're able to sit together, there are a lot of challenges. Language is one of them. And then culture is another thing. What is culture? Do you know what is culture? Culture means the way of doing things. The way of doing things. When you come into the church, there's a lot of cultural elements in our expression of our spirituality. The way we dressed, what do you expect a speaker? What's the dress code for a speaker? This is a church culture. So do I need to put on a tie? There are churches, like if I go to speak, they ask that you put on a tie in every session. Now, there are some churches that put on jeans like me today. It's fine. So this is called culture. We are based on our value, our background, our experience. Some culture does not have right or wrong. Do I need to put on a tie? It's not about right or wrong moral issue. Some of the culture have some cultural, also some moral issue behind it. So culture is a very, very, very important thing. And culture also changes. It moves. When you first come to America, the first generation, you retain a lot of Chinese culture, the way of doing things in China. When you come here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you change the way of doing things. And then your culture shifts. The next generation was born and raised here. They go to school here, they study here, they watch TV here, they have friends in here. So the way of doing things in here, they brought up in this way, and then they express their spirituality in that way. So culture is a big element. Now the most important thing is about why. Why do you need to do it? Your value. Is it important to you enough to pass on your faith from one generation to generation, so-called the sticky faith? That faith can stick. Last night we talked about 50%, over 50% of our next generation who grew up in the church leave the church after college. 50%. That number continues to grow. This is across America. We are not talking about among just the Chinese church. We're talking about across America. Those who grew up in the church, 50%, every two left the church. So is it important enough? Is it God's will for us to bring the generation together so that the faith can be passed along? Now, this is what sticky faith is all about. Overcome challenges, cultural differences, language differences, and many, many things in order to pass along our heritage. The value is passed along the faith from one generation. It's not passing on the culture. So in the next two segments of our talk today, Jeremy will come in and first talk about four things, about four challenges in this sticky faith. In this process of passing along faith from one generation to next generation. As a church, what are some challenges that we are facing? And then I'll come back from an older generation perspective and look at some of the challenges that we have. All right, let's just welcome Jeremy from Houston, Texas. Thank you, Jeremy.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? As a guest is a little tricky. Can you just want to confirm?
Just stop.
You can't hear me? Hello? Too soft? I guess I have to be really close to the mic. Is this okay?
Jeremy,
nope.
Just wait a little.
Too loud?
Hear you. So,
okay. Check 1, 2. Is it too loud? Check 1, 2. Check. Good morning. Good morning. Yes, no? Technological difficulties. Give me a second. Check.
Okay, got
we did a sound check this morning. Good?
All right.
You guys can hear me? All right, perfect. I was going to switch to another device. Thank you, Pastor Brian, for that introduction. I can completely relate to that video that Pastor Brian talked about. I remember when I was in college, I had called home one day asking my mom how to make mapo tofu. And what turned out through the instructions of my mom was nothing like my mom's mapo tofu. She said, yeah, just pour a little bit of this, pour a little of that, and then out comes mapo tofu. So it didn't turn out that way, unfortunately. So I completely understand, and I completely relate to that story, the introduction that Pastor Brian talked about. And unfortunately, for many of our young people, that's the reality of the situation, where the experience oftentimes doesn't match the output of our young people. How our parents came to faith, how our parents came to knowing Jesus and starting walking in their faith is completely different. And what has happened is there is I wouldn't say a growing gap, but a very significant gap. And we wanted to point out a few reasons as to why we felt like, especially for our younger generation, that they begin to walk away from their faith and really struggle with understanding faith. The first thing that I wanted to talk about this morning is this idea of outsourcing education. What am I talking about? I'm talking about academic extracurriculars and spiritual education. So growing up, I remember that if I wanted to learn anything, my parents had to go find a tutor, or they had to find a class. I remember going to Kumon very early on. I remember going when I was 5 years old. My parents found me a violin teacher that could teach me how to play violin. I remember going to Chinese school. I remember going to all these different places. When I started playing tennis in 8th grade, my parents found me a tennis coach. And I get it. There's a lot of these things that my parents did not know how to do, so they needed to outsource the education. Today's culture is the outsourcing of education today is even more. You're talking about kids starting in preschool, going to daycare. You're talking about finding math tutors, science tutors, calculus tutors. You're talking about taking SAT prep classes. You're talking about even outsourcing driving school, outsourcing all of these things. And what our culture has done is, due to the same lack of experience, we have put spiritual education, spiritual growth, spiritual growing, the sanctification process in the same boat as math, English, and science. And so the outsourcing of education has become very prominent throughout our entire culture. And I think I'm not just talking specifically about Chinese culture, but I'm talking about American culture as well. It is so important for us to have our kids educated. But however, when it comes to the spiritual lives of our young people, it cannot be outsourced. Our spiritual education of our young people cannot be outsourced. It must come from the home. It must come from the family. Because parents, if you read the book about Sticky Faith, parents are the most influential people in a young person's life. And so if a parent is the one that is taking the primary responsibility for the spiritual education of our young people, and not just outsourcing it to the church is supposed to be a resource for the parents. It's not supposed to be the primary source of spiritual education. And that's really where one of the gaps has become. Because what happens is we're teaching our kids something on Sunday. I get about a total of 4.5 hours in 1 week. 1 week, I get about 4.5 hours of face-to-face time with young people. That includes our youth group time. Maybe I visit their small group. Maybe I get to speak on a Sunday when we had our youth service. What do you think that 4.5 hours is going to do in the course of the number of hours over an entire week? That time is so short. And on top of that, the reinforcement of the spiritual education, it cannot come from me as the youth pastor. And I think that's what's really hard, because it is then the responsibility of the family. Where can our young people see the things that are being taught? Because spiritual education is not simply about head knowledge, but it's about living it out in our lives and in our hearts. And so that's the first thing when we're talking about outsourcing education. Spiritual education is not the same thing as learning violin. It's not the same thing as learning piano. It's not the same thing as going to Chinese school. And the second difficulty I wanted to address actually comes in three parts. And Pastor Brian touched upon it a little bit earlier. He's talking about cultural gaps. Now, oftentimes when we think about the Chinese American culture, the Chinese and the second generation culture, we're thinking about, okay, there's Chinese culture, right? And it also depends. It also depends. If you're from Hong Kong, you grew up a little bit different than if you grew up in mainland China. And if you grew up in Taiwan, like my parents did, it's a little bit different from that. So there's these cultural gaps that we're talking about, not just country, but a time. There's a time as far as technology, access to media, access to news, access to information. And one of the most prominent things that Pastor Brian touched upon is this language barrier gap. Now, I was very fortunate. Growing up, I would go to my waipo's house. And so I have a conversational level of speaking Mandarin. Every day we would go and we would be able to speak. My waipo, she would take us and she would tutor us a little bit because she was a teacher in Taiwan. And she would teach us math and Chinese. That was what she would do. So unfortunately, I have a passable Chinese like ability to speak, and because I actually took Chinese in college, I have maybe a first or second grade level of reading Chinese, so I can read a little bit. The language barrier is incredibly difficult, mainly because it's one of the most tangible things to cross, at the same time most difficult. Language barriers is going to be one of the biggest hindrances in spiritual education, because what are we talking about here? We're talking about very deep and technical terms. What is the Chinese term for sanctification? I can't tell you. I don't know. As much as I would love to be able to talk to my parents about their process, their growing spiritually, I don't have the vocabulary. I can barely order Chinese food at a Chinese restaurant, and you're expecting me to talk about my faith? I think it's so hard. It's so hard. And so the language barrier is going to be the first cultural gap that we're talking about. The second one is this idea of Chinese culture, like I was saying earlier, Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China, versus American culture. Now, when we typically think about these things, we think that there are two. There's Chinese culture, and then there's American culture. However, our young people, our second generation from our immigrant parents, it is a blend. It's not just American culture. Sorry, to this finger. It's not just American culture. It's not Chinese culture, but Chinese American culture. It is this cross-cultural thing that is neither distinctly Chinese, neither distinctly American. And so our young people are growing up with this kind of confused sense of identity. And fortunately, within the past, I think, couple of years, the Asian American identity has really started to come up. And we're really starting to explore what that Asian American identity is. Actually, very newly, there's a few universities and colleges have been offering Asian American identity or cultural as a actual degree in colleges and universities now. What is the Asian American culture? What is that experience? You know, and for our young people, they're growing up without someone who has walked that path and continued on in their faith during this time. And so this is so important. The question for us is, who is going to be able to start bridging this gap, this cultural gap, language, cultural, these sorts of things? And this is really where Sticky Faith comes in. How do we begin to talk about our faith, talk about spirituality, not outsource the education? And it has to start in the home, because like I said earlier, the parents are the most influential people in a young person's life. And secondly, our young people, they need to understand that they may not have the same cultural understanding, but it does take work, it does take effort. And so we both, and I'm not saying just Parents need to take the first step. Our young people, our next generation, also need to take the first step into bridging that gap. One of the key components here at Fort Bend Community Church is our 1.5 generation, our college students, people who are maybe my age and a little bit younger. I'm a little bit older than college. I've been out of college for quite some time, actually. But someone who has walked ahead of these young people, who have the experience of growing up in this culture, in the Chinese American culture, and then someone who has the maturity, the level of the brain maturity, the physical maturity to understand and empathize with what our parents have gone through. My dad always told me a story when I was growing up, and he always told me, hey, when I was 18 or 19, I can't remember how old he was. Anyway, he said, I left Taiwan with a suitcase and my guitar. He would always tell me the story, and I would say, that's nice. I don't know what am I supposed to do with that information? I don't know. And it wasn't until I actually got to college when I was packing, I remember I was packing up my Camry, and I remember packing up all of the stuff that I had and thinking about it and being like, oh, if I was my dad, I would actually not need my whole car. My dad literally had one suitcase, one guitar. I had a complete boxes full of all of my stuff. And not only that, my parents followed me to the University of Texas in their van full of my stuff, all of my stuff. Right? And it wasn't until that maturity, going through that experience of leaving home and understanding, oh, that story means something. It means something. My dad came from literally nothing to the point where I, going off to university, get to experience this amazing life. It takes someone who has experienced that, who has gone through that. And I know that at Westchester, there have been young people who have gone through that, people who are ahead of these young people who are sitting here in this room. And so our college students, our young people, that generation, what we call the 1.5 generation, they're going to be are going to actually be very key in understanding sticky faith, because they can start to bridge the gap, the cultural gap as well. The last two things are going to be kind of hand in hand. The third thing is lack of empathy, and the fourth thing is lack of modeling. Empathy is something that is one of our counseling, it's mainly known as a counseling term, but more and more, it's so important in the church. The church is divided, our country is divided. A lot of things bring division. The Apostle Paul talks about unity of the church so much. It is important, and it's even more important for us because of these gaps that we have in the church. Empathy is being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes and understand the feelings and emotions that person is experiencing. And this is something that is required of everyone in the church. This is required of everyone in the church. Young people, older people, grandparents. And this is something that we all as a church can work on, because it removes judgment. It removes solving things for the other party. It puts the prioritization of understanding one another first. And because of these cultural gaps, we simply don't understand each other. And one of the biggest, I guess, blockades for empathy is the idea of modeling. The idea of modeling. I recently saw a video that talked about how do we raise our, what is the one of, he was talking in the video, he was talking about 4 ways that you can raise your children. And the first thing that this person said in the video was modeling. And I was super convicted, because the first thing that he said was, if you don't want your children to be on screens, you need to not be on your screen too. And I was thinking about it, man, just this morning, when I was playing, I have an 11-month-old son. And this morning I was playing, like playing with him, sitting in his playroom, and I was on my phone. And I felt really convicted as I was watching this video about modeling. And it's so true. If I want my son not to be addicted to my phone or addicted to screens, I can't be addicted either. And it's the same thing with empathy. However, the thing is, our parents growing up in Hong Kong, in China, in Taiwan, they didn't experience empathy. I shouldn't say they didn't. A lot of them did not. And so because of that, there's a lack of modeling. And included in that is this spiritual education. Modeling is going to be so key, so important. However, a lot of us don't know how to do that. And so because of that, it's so important for us to start somewhere. And I'm so glad that we're here this weekend, that we can share this with you, because this is where it starts. This is really where it starts. And so I'm going to hand the time back over to Pastor Brian, and he's going to cover a few more things as far as what are some of the difficulties and challenges of sticky faith in the church.
Thank you, Jeremy, Pastor Jeremy. Okay, Pastor Jeremy talked about 4 things, right? 4 challenges. Number 1 is outsourcing education, spiritual education. Someone else can teach my kids about spirituality. Number 2 is cultural challenges, how to overcome cultural gaps in the church in terms of spirituality. Number 3 is lack of empathy, not able to understand each other from different backgrounds. Lastly is lack of model. Now, I want to add a couple more from a church perspective. What are some of the challenges for the church as a church to have sticky faith? Then we'll end the sessions, and then we'll come back for some Q&A sessions. Now, for a Chinese church, in order to have sticky faith happen in the church, passing on our faith from one generation to another generation, the church needs the challenge to the church, number 1, is that we're so used to so-called this silo ministry mentality. Chinese church typically have English, then have Chinese. We're children ministry, we're youth ministry, then we're adult ministry. And very complex situation. So our family, when they come to church, if the family has grandpa, grandma, if they have mommy, daddy, and they have youth, and they have children, they come into a minivan and then drive to church. At the church door, they say goodbye to each other. The senior will go to senior class, they have the senior fellowship. And then the parents will go to small group, go to worship service, Chinese service. And then the youth will go to youth service under the youth English minister to preach to them. And then go to Sunday school. And then the children will usher them into the children ministry and have children program. So 3 hours later, then the family don't see each other at all this 3 hours. And then when they on their way home, they all have a good day, but then a different day. And they don't talk to each other. In the car, it's silence. They have different spiritual expression, different spiritual experiences. So when they go home, silent. They come to church together. And then one in the church, they all go separate way. And then when they come back, go home and wait for next week, next Sunday to come back. Then Sunday, go through the same thing again. Now, if this happened every Sunday, then every year, 15 years, 18 years later, the children go to college, and the grandpa, grandma, like me, will go to heaven, and then the mommy, daddy become senior citizens. We all have different spiritual experience. No dialogue, no common ground. And if anything happened within the next generation in their spiritual life, there's no relationship at all to talk about this. They have different vocabulary, they have different languages, different expression. Sometimes they're even critical of each other. You are not spiritual. And then, no, the Bible doesn't say this. And then they have different understanding of what faith is all about. Now, as a church, it's so easy to have this so-called silo mentality. We all do our own thing. We all do our own thing to the best of our ability, and we build a youth ministry that glorifies God. We build a children ministry that are pleasing God, and we have adult ministry, but we all do things differently. Now, this weekend, hopefully, I'll be able to have some conversation with the church leadership. Is this what the church is all about? Under the same roof, we have 5 ministries going on in parallel structure. Now, if that happens, that will not have sticky faith. The research tells us faith passed on is cross-generation. The younger generation look at different generation, the grandpa, granddad, grandmama, and then the parents, the adult, and also the youth look up to different older young adult. And cross-generation spiritual experience become a model. What Jeremy was talking about this modeling. Faith is learned best by modeling. That's what Paul said. Imitate me as I follow Christ. Faith, when a generation going up, it is about watching, not about hearing. What they see is much better than what they hear. We can say whatever we want, but by watching, this is where faith becomes real to them. So number one, the church need to think about, how do we do things together? Elder Hai talked to me all the time about this family ministry. How can we cross this cultural language barrier, and then when we come together, we have family together ministry. Now this is a whole new topic. We're all learning together. We don't have all the answer, but you need the first challenge of a church, of a Chinese church in sticky faith, is to rethink your English ministry and the Chinese ministry and the youth ministry and the children ministry, so that we have this built the cross-generation ministry. Now let me give you a few more examples. This is a church retreat, right? So last night, we have worship together. When I observe, sing songs. We have English lyrics, and then we have Chinese lyrics. And I observe your practice. When Chinese sing, they sing all in Chinese. Then English, mum. And then English sing, they would sing the English song. Some Chinese would join if they want to sing in English. Now this is the way we practice worship together as a joint. Then afterward, last night, we sent the youth and the English speaking to upstairs. They have Pastor Jeremy preach to them, and the Chinese speaking stay here, and then we hear a Chinese speaker speaking. Now, this morning, I insisted, let's come together. All generations come together. And then the speaker will be in English. I don't know how many Chinese speaking of congregation among here feel uncomfortable. Well, how come a Chinese speak English? And why don't we have translation? I don't feel very comfortable about in English, in Chinese preaching. Now all of this you think through. When a church come together, I attended many church retreat, and a very common practice of a Chinese church is this: they invite an English speaker to speak to the English congregation, and they have a Chinese speaker speak to the Chinese congregation. It's one retreat, but it's 2 retreats at the same site. Is it the best way to do it? Now, for a church, you need to think through some of the issue. Joint services doesn't mean there's cross-cultural or cross-generational relationship. You sit here, but you don't speak to one another. Sit next to you, maybe English speaking, maybe a youth, but you don't speak to one another. So meeting may not be the best way. This afternoon, we'll all go to the park. Now, that's a better way. We have games together, we play together, so we have cross-generation activity. Now, all of this I'll just give you an example. All of this, when you think through, challenge to sticky faith, is how the church administer, how does the church serve the congregation, so that we can build a faith that stick, passing on one generation to another generation. It all starts with the leadership. What kind of resources we put into this? What kind of manpower, what kind of priority we put on this? As a church, the leadership need to think through. The vision driven, the desire to build a faith that's sticky, that's able to bring along, to break this 50% dropout rate disaster into improving 80%, 60%, 70%, 80% or more, able to pass on and remain follower of Christ. So these are some of the things we can explore some more. Again, we don't have all the answer, but we have tried many things. What works, what doesn't work, we will share with you. And then if your value is right, if your vision is right, you will find a way to do it. Now, second thing as a church is about what Jeremy is talking about, is your church priority, your church priority. You need to keep on learning. Keep on learning. Learning, have a lot of empathy, learning to think along the way, learning to learn the other generation thinking. Build understanding. Last night, Pastor Chan asked me in front of everyone about these questions. The challenge is for a Chinese church. Maybe 40% of congregation, they already past the age of parenting. The children are grown up, become adult, go on into the society, and some of them very successful, become very faithful Christians, some of them falling along the wayside. So they would think, the church, how do we mobilize the older generation or the empty nesters among us in order to buy into this sticky faith, involve themselves into bringing up the next generation in a godly way, become the one among the five to be a friend, to be a sponsor, to be a model for the one young generation. How do we do that? Again, the answer to this question is not that simple. I want to encourage, first of all, I want to encourage people who already think they passed this stage of parenting. The kids already grown up, becoming, even they have grandchildren. Never give up. Never give up. Parenting or your role of being a model to the next generation, never stop. Parenting or raising up the next generation is not like a basketball game. 4 quarters, and then by the end of the 4th quarter, game is over. We're winner, we're loser. So when the kids go to college, it's not the end of the game. Okay, your job is done. Even though when you go to college, even after they graduate from college and go into become a young adult, that your influence may be different, but the game is not over. I want to encourage you. I see many stories also that when their kids grow up, become young adults, or become parents, or become older, you still play a very important role in their lives. You still have a spiritual influence with them that is beyond your imagination. Now, depending on how you go about in expressing your spirituality to your adult children. The game is not over. When we have time, we'll Q&A and question, we'll talk more about this. How do we talk to adult children about our faith? Sticky faith is not a finite game. It is an infinite game. Keep on going. Keep on going. Never give up. There are certain windows in life that usually will open up to eternal questions, open up to spirituality. When they are young, so-called from infancy all the way maybe to teen or early teen or preteen. This is the age when you have the most influence. You have the most influence to influence how they behave, how the value you lay on them, and then they stick to you. You spend most time with you. When they go to teenager, they start to push you away to establish their own identity. That's the age maybe from puberty, 12, 13, for girls a bit earlier, for boys a bit later. So all the way maybe now to 20 years old or so. So this is called a teenager time, the adolescent time. This is a time they don't want you to know anything about them. Using Chap Clark's terminology, it said they go under the water. And then when they resurface out, there's a different person already. So during this time, they don't want you to know anything. There's a tremendous changes within them. You want to find who they are, where they belong, what's the purpose of their life, what I'm going to do with my life. Those are the questions they process. And faith is one of the major elements they need to process. To own this faith, to find answer to eternal questions. This is called the adolescent time. Then when they go to young adult, college, and then graduate school maybe, and then go to 30 years old, or before they get married. Now this is the most difficult time in America. For Asian America, from children who grew up from the church, what I observe, this period of time is the most challenging time. They go on to different workplace because of job situation, schooling. They may go to 10,000 miles away and occasionally come back to church, come back to home. This is a time they feel very lonely. And they encounter a different culture, a different world. From a Chinese home to Asian American culture, what Jeremy was talking about, and then to the American society. And all of this become a tremendous challenge. Our time is a very difficult time. Political upheaval, international changes, and then social structure, media changes, all of that created in a very short time tremendous changes. And to them, they have a very difficult time to adjust and to adapt and find where they belong. You need to have a lot of empathy to understand this is the time when they go through the most challenged, difficult time in terms of their faith. I have young adults grew up in our church. Parents very godly. They go to church. The children go to church all their lives. Go to college, even though they're still very faithful and growing spiritually. And once they go to the workplace, go to a new city, go unable to find a spiritual community, and slowly, they step back, and become very, very hard. I grieve for them, but this is the time that is the most challenge. We see them struggle a lot. Now, as a parent, you still have tremendous leverage with your children. Don't abandon them, even though they may not listen to you. Whatever you say to them, huh? But it doesn't mean you don't have any influence on them. Befriend them, talk to them, pray for them. If opportunity arises, pray with them. I visited my daughter last month and my son-in-law, and we spent time together praying, talk about church life, as adult to adult. No longer as a father to my underage daughter. We talk as adult and adult. And we can communicate in spiritual terms. What are some of the struggles I listened to? These are the conversations you can still make a huge difference. But be sensitive. This time, this age, within this age bracket, I can see this is the most challenging time. Now, when they get married, when they have their first child, now this is the time, statistic-wise, this is the time they go back to the church. The opportunity for them to go back to church is wide open. When they become parents, all of a sudden, they realize, how do I raise my kid? So they will think about the future of the kids. They think about how they were brought up in the church. So they are open to the possibility of going back to the church if they drop out during their younger adult life. I see many come back. So our church, one of the fastest growing segment of our church is the English-speaking ABC young parent generation. In our church ministry, this population of the third generation Chinese, the son and children, the son and daughter of the ABC generation, is growing. Pastor Jeremy has a boy that is 11 months old. And this is the age group that they consider going back to the church. As grandparents, it is very, very important you be there. You be there, available to them. And then not just babysitting your grandchildren, but also be there, be their spiritual guide, partner with them in raising up their children. This is the time when they go back. Now, if this window is closed, they not coming back to the church, or they don't have time to develop their spiritual, it will be waiting for another 10, 15 years until there's a crisis in their life. There's another time window open. When they're facing life and death issue, then their faith you deposit in them when they're young will start to come back and then ask some important questions. So those are some of the windows that I can observe from my experience and then from study that young adult, our next generation growing up, these are the window. So don't never give up on being a spiritual a mentor, a spiritual influencer to your children. This game is not over. I want to encourage you. You cannot force on them the decision they need to make for themselves, but still, you have a role in this. Now, when you come back to the church, the Great Commission said, go and make disciples of all nations. We go to far away in Germany, we go away, far away in China to do missions. But inside the church, there's a next generation here that desperate need your involvement in terms of raising them. Now, there are a lot of challenges when the older generation try to befriend or reach out to the next generation because of cultural language. A lot of the adults come and talk to me. I want to befriend a youth, but when I go to them, when I tell them, hey, how are you, what's your name? They just, as if they never heard. Ignore you, not talking to you. When you try to have a conversation, it seems like they don't want to talk to you. Now this, breaking the ice, build relationship, the best is happen in a small group setting. This afternoon, we have activity at the church. In a small group based, we relate to another. In my small group, I know my small group members' children, and then they know my children. In a small group, this 5-in-1 situation can happen. You need to own this vision. Great Commission. Yes, go to foreign mission field. But within the church, the next generation is a mission field itself. You can be a blessing. You can be a blessing. So my time is over now. So these are some of the things that I want to touch on, some of the challenges. The key is this must have a vision-based, a purpose-driven. You see the needs of next generation. And the result is not going to be perfect. There will still be people who drop out. There are people who, the choices they made, you feel sorry for them. There's no perfect church at all. But if you look at what God has commanded us to do, raise up the children and then teach them the way that they should go, they will follow. They will follow. The impact will be felt from generation to generation. All right, we will end this session. Sorry about overtime, so I turn it back to Chow.